Newspapers are a part of our everyday lives. They're still one of the cheapest and most accessible ways of finding out the things that are happening around us. And they're also becoming increasingly important for students as a convenient and easy to obtain record of current events. We take newspapers for granted, but what does happen behind the scenes? Who writes the stories? Where does the information come from? How is a newspaper produced and who pays for it? In this program, we're going to look inside the production processes of a large daily newspaper and talk to some of the people who put it together. For the Melbourne Age, the first step in the production of Wednesday's paper is the morning conference, 9:30 Tuesday morning.
We've got the media lockup on now, and the decision will be publicly announced at 10. The two Lyns, Cossa and Dunleavy are up there for us with the trunk. Lynn will be doing that, Lynn Cossa, a backgrounder, comment piece and reaction from unions and employers. We're also chasing an interview with John Dawson, the Skipton farmer who set up
our
this,
morning conference is the first chance we get to sort of gather our thoughts for the day. And it builds basically on a list that's been left overnight from the group of people who work in the evening. There will be ideas on that list to develop during the day, and we will discuss the big events of the day.
Following the morning conference, the Chief of Staff starts to organise the local news gathering, assigning stories to various reporters. Lynn Dunleavy is one of the Age's specialist industrial reporters, working from an office at Trades Hall. There are similar offices for reporters at police headquarters, State Parliament and the courts. This morning, Lynn is one of the two Age journalists at the Industrial Relations Commission to report on the major story for the day, the national wage case.
We got notified about midday yesterday that the Commission was going to hand down its wage case decision, and could make very little preparation for it. We've been expecting it over the last 2 weeks. We've just had a lock-up for about an hour where we've been handed the decision and had a quick read-through. We're waiting for the employers and the unions who have only just received their copies of the decision to read through it and work out their assessment of it. And we're waiting for them to come out and have a chat to us about what they think and where to from here. We do what we call doorstops. There'll be quite a number of sort of figurehead people from unions and employer groups that you normally go to get a response. They'll be surrounded by journalists and ask questions.
I think our major concern at the moment really is to issue a call on all the parties, the employers, trade unions and governments, to ensure that this decision is implemented appropriately and all conditions are properly met.
Could you clarify those conditions you're talking about?
I think the important fact...
Age photographer Sebastian Costanzo is also assigned to the story, but it's the TV crews that dominate the scene. Their footage will be broadcast in the television news this evening. The radio journalists have already filed their reports, some directly to air. So where does this place the role of the newspaper, which won't hit the streets until tomorrow morning? This relationship holds more than a little interest for the manager of the Age's editorial staff, Editor Mike Smith.
I think the different mediums, television and radio, are marvellous mediums for instant transmission of news, and in TV's case, especially with pictures. But there's remarkably little information transmitted in a TV broadcast. The great strength of newspapers is in the detail and the background and the analysis to major issues.
This detail, analysis and comment that Mike talks about happens in a number of places in the paper. The news stories have the basic information about what's been happening, and compared to TV and radio, more items are covered and there is more detail. Another difference with newspapers is that you can select which items you want to read. The headlines act as guides. Background information and analysis is more likely to occur in a feature article. Sometimes these will appear in a special weekly supplement. Comment about current events is found in the columns written by journalists with a particular area of expertise, in cartoons, in letters to the editor where readers can have their say, and in the editorial or leader. Another important point about all this information is that it's in a form that can easily be cut up, referenced and filed. This isn't impossible with radio and TV, but a lot harder to handle. The ability of newspapers to publish comment about various issues can be viewed as a very effective way in which the management of a newspaper can change public opinion. But just how much influence does a paper have?
The press certainly has a certain power in a society. It both reflects and to some degree leads, I guess, public debate. There are two different ways, essentially, in which the press affects public debate. One way, and perhaps the less important, is the newspaper's own opinion, expressed in its editorial column. That's the unsigned leader. We run 2 a day. But the thing about those, and particularly in the election setting, is most research done in America, where most of this research has been done, is that a newspaper very seldom changes the public's point of view. What it may do is give the bandwagon a push. Now, the other way in which we influence debate, of course, is in our selection of the news that we think is important. And that's arrived at through a necessarily subjective process whereby editorial executives and the journalists themselves decide what's important. And if you ask me precisely what the rules are for arriving at that sort of decision, I can't tell you. I mean, there are a whole lot of processes involved. Somebody decides, should we cover this story? That's the chief of staff as a rule. The reporter then goes out there and decides what about this story does he think most important, because that will be the intro to his story. He will bring the story back, put it in, and somebody may decide that he's got quite the wrong intro to the story. And eventually, through the process of editing, it appears in the paper. But that whole process is pretty subjective.
Part of the problem facing a newspaper like The Age is the sheer volume of information that's coming in each day.
One of the world's more famous newspapers is the New York Times, and it has one of the most famous of all newspaper slogans, which is all the news that's fit to print. It's a very good slogan, but in a sense it's a lie. What the New York Times prints is all the news that fits.
There's about 1 million words a day come into this place from our various sources, our local staff resources and our foreign services. And I estimate that less than 2% of that actually makes the paper, less than 2% is published. Those choices are made by fallible editors, not just one editor, but a large group of editors who have to make sometimes quite subjective judgments about what's important, what's news. And there is no golden formula to decide what's news. We have to take into account what we think is important going on around us, take into account our readership, and the main thing is to satisfy the readership. If we're not doing it properly, people won't buy us. If we are doing it properly, the newspaper survives and thrives.
But a paper like The Age doesn't survive just because people pay for it at the newsstand. That's likely to only pay for the paper it's printed on. The main income is from advertising, and the ability to sell advertising space is linked to the profile of the readership.
The Herald Sun and ourselves basically aim at different markets. In technical terms, I suppose we aim at a higher socio-economic group, which is smaller in number than the Sun. What we aim to attract is a certain class of advertising which wants what they call A-B readers. These are people who I suppose in general would have at least completed secondary schooling and probably have or will have some tertiary qualifications. And because we can deliver an audience made up mainly of those sorts of people who also tend to have more money and therefore tend to buy more of the things the advertisers are trying to sell, we can charge more for our advertisements. And a paper like the Herald Sun will, I mean, if you look at the sort of advertisements that run there, you'll see much more on the sort of retail side, although we fight them for that, but advertisers going for, as it were, the mass market, will be more likely to advertise in the mass circulation paper. This is how two newspapers can survive side by side and both be pretty good newspapers.
Another difference between the Herald Sun and the Age is their size. The Age is a broadsheet and the Herald Sun is a tabloid. The smaller tabloid is easier to handle on the bus or while you're eating your breakfast. So what's the advantage of the broadsheet?
Well, in a broadsheet, you're able to have a much sort of wider window on the world on your front page editorially. You can have 5 or 6 items, and you look for a balance of what's important locally, nationally, and around the world. Tabloid newspapers tend to go for one story on the front, an eye-catching story to get readership. Broadsheet newspapers are the ones that appear to be surviving in the long term in the face of threats from TV and radio. If you look at the picture in this country and around the world, the newspapers that have died or suffered have generally been the tabloid, especially the afternoon papers, who faced a much bigger threat from television, because a lot of the material they were publishing, by the time the readers had it in their hands, it was already on the TV screens.
Well, this time the TV cameras are on the steps of Parliament House, together with Age reporter James Button.
The ACF has held a conference in which they've released a letter from David Bellamy, the famous environmentalist, asking the Leader of the Opposition, Alan Brown, not to go ahead with blocking the government's plans to prevent any more clearing of vegetation on private land. That's the main gist of the press conference. The thing about this story is that it's been going on for a while, so we need to find a new angle at the newspaper. I mean, it's already been in the newspaper that the opposition intends to block the legislation. I think the new angle will be that David Bellamy has written a letter to Alan Brown, but also there's some new material about species that are threatened with extinction if the clearing goes ahead. And I found that quite interesting because, again, it's a different angle that hasn't been in the paper before.
Where's the story likely to end up?
Good question. I wish I knew. I would predict page 5, perhaps, optimistically.
Well, James's prediction was close. The story ended up on page 6. Page 5 would have meant that the article had been given more importance, closer to the front of the paper and a more prominent right-hand page. This is why page 3 is more important than page 2. If we have a look at the article, we can start to examine the mechanics of writing a news story. In particular, notice how the report starts. Dr. David Bellamy, the British conservationist, has written to the Leader of the State Opposition, Mr. Brown, urging the Coalition not to block a planning amendment that would prevent the clearing of native vegetation on private land. This is not the way you would usually start an essay. This is a summary of the whole report, or as journalist John Leahy explains.
Well, a news story classically is the reverse of a fairy tale in this sense. And it's the reverse of Shakespeare in the same sense, that in the classic way of telling a Western story, a short story, a fairy tale, a Shakespearean play, the main point comes last. News writing is the very reverse of this. You put the main point first. If two masked men walk into a bank at this moment, shoot 2 people, steal $100,000, jump in a car and speed away, you don't start that story by saying it was a foggy day in Spencer Street today, and many people were out shopping and there were commuters and so forth. No, you come right into it. You say, 2 masked men shot 2 bank tellers in a raid in Spencer Street today and escaped with $100,000. The main point is first.
By contrast, John Leahy usually writes regular human interest stories.
I'm trying to entertain, largely, and I see myself as an entertainer because I'm on a heavyweight newspaper whose raison d'etre is politics, social change, economics, and at times it can be a great deal to bite in the morning, all of that swallowed with your Weet-Bix. So I try to be different. I try to be, ideally, I look for a love story or an adventure story. It's a little conversation. Every time I sit down to write one of my stories, I imagine I'm talking to someone. I try to get the picture of one person in my mind, not a a group of people. I'm not writing for a mass. I'm writing for one person, a neighbour, often a woman. And I figure if that interests this one person, it's going to interest the whole neighbourhood, and for the whole neighbourhood, read the whole community, the whole state. That's how I start out. In simple language, lucid language, simple as possible, paying particular attention to the first couple of sentences. They have to arrest them on the spot. They have to stop the reader in their tracks, and the reader has to say, golly, I've got to read this. So I could spend the bulk of my writing time just doing an introduction.
Lynn Dunleavy is also writing a human interest or news colour article about the wage case to accompany the main story. She's interviewing a construction worker for his reaction to the wage decision.
A bit more consideration we give them.
Most building workers sort of managing to cope in the recession?
No, there's quite a lot that find it very hard. And if you talk about the lucky country now, you're lucky if you can keep up with your bills and anything else for that matter. I mean, the irony of that is you're lucky if you can afford to buy a house, you're lucky if you can keep a job, and then you're lucky if you can keep yourself in debt.
The idea is to get some reaction from some real wage and salary earners about how the wage case affects them, what it's going to mean for, you know, their wallet, how it's going to help them pay their bills. I had a discussion with the deputy editor yesterday to work out who we could look at, and rang a few unions yesterday and said, look, we're after, you know, an average building worker. Can you help me? And the union organiser said, yep, look, bring this person. And I teed up an interview with him today, and he's done his research and found out about what the wage case was and what it meant for him and for most of the workers he represents. He's a shop steward on the site, and had a fair idea of exactly what the impact would be.
What would be your process of actually writing up the story?
Well, I'll go back to my office and have a look through my notes, and I've got a fair idea of what I'm going to write anyway. Just by listening to someone, the salient points come up. It'll sort of be two-pronged. It's not good enough. A bit disappointed the unions weren't able to deliver what they'd promised workers, and just sort of an analysis of exactly how it affects him and his workers.
Got any clues as to how you might start it?
Not yet. That usually, the sort of first paragraph of the story is usually something that sort of comes by the end of the story. You have a go at it, but you're not really sure how it's going to work out until the end. It usually hits you some way through the writing process.
And how long is the story likely to be?
Probably about, at the age we talk in terms of centimetres, probably 20 centimetres. It's quite short, but it's, because it's sort of seen as we call them picture stories, because we'll probably have a very good picture. It's a great picture opportunity here. So we'll have bold type and a picture to go along with it. So the words will have to be very concise and to the point.
I think the best picture from this angle here is trying to look up, make it as interesting as possible with all the structure and the building. And Gareth with his construction hat on and whatever, looking onto the distance. As long as it's a strong picture and so on and attracts people's attention, you know, it makes it a strong picture that people take notice of and want to read the article. That's my basic concern. Come closer to me. Let's work this out, good? Just try crouching for a second.
The way that Sebastian is making a photograph of Gareth the construction worker brings up an interesting point. The subtle strength of photographs is their ability to capture reality, real things that are happening. But a lot of newspaper photographs are in fact manufactured by the photographer. Age photographer Bruce Possel sees this as being particularly the case in a country like Australia.
A lot of the big news stories that come out of Europe and America relate to people demonstrating and subjects that maybe happen here on a small scale, but we just don't get the impact of them here. And consequently, I'd say about 80% of our pictures have got to be constructed. It becomes fairly easy after a while in the job to be able to walk up and say, if I do this or if I do that or if I shift this or if I put that guy there, it's going to make a better picture for me.
And with black and white photography, the image can be changed quite a lot in the darkroom.
Oh, you can change the whole look of the photo by darkening backgrounds, lightening backgrounds, darkening the whole print, making it look more mysterious. I suppose really the list would be endless. I mean, the things you can do to a black and white negative in the darkroom. I mean, the final subject is me, what I want it to be.
But this isn't the case with the increasing use of machine-printed colour photographs in the age, and the photographers are complaining.
I love glorious black and white. I'm the sort of person that turns down the colour TV to watch a movie.
I'm an expert in black and white, but I'm a novice in colour, so I've got to learn all over again. And that's the future, really, colour with newspapers. And I hate colour. Ugh.
Another powerful form of graphic in the newspaper is the cartoon. Ron Tanberg is one of 7 cartoonists at the Age.
It's a sort of a combination of sort of thinking and sort of gut reaction really to a lot of things. You're sort of combining the two, of doing a lot of thinking, and also a lot of spontaneity has to come into it, and often it's that sort of connection of odd ideas. It helps being right where it's happening, like when people actually show me a story. Sometimes I can often get an idea straight away, or if they say something to me, it's not so much reading the story, it's often getting the feeling from what the person is that's telling me, and I often get it direct. I can often do it on a phone.
Through the day, news information continues to pour into the Age via the wire services, computer links, letters, fax, telephone and the pictogram machines.
The other list,
Then at around 6 o'clock in the evening, there is a news conference to decide which news reports will make it into tomorrow's paper, and in particular, what will appear on the important pages 1 and 3.
Well, wages is clearly the big story. On the front, we'll take the trunk story. I think we'll go ahead and do a big graphic incorporating the picture, summarising the decision, what it means to weekly wages after tax, and highlights of the reaction and commentary, and it'll give a good glance of the whole story in a big graphic, and I think we could probably hold it at that for the story on the front.
Next, the photographs for the paper are selected at the picture conference.
That's another one that's just come in, but the best one is the one you have.
Yeah, you've got...
Things could still change, but at this stage, Sebastian's photograph of the construction worker is heading for the front page, with the addition of a graph to explain the results of the wage case. The copy, or text, for the main story is still being written by a number of reporters, including Lynn Dunleavy at Trades Hall. Now the assembly of the news pages starts. Brian Diamond is responsible for the layout of the front page. He is one of 15 sub-editors on the news desk.
Well, after conference, Sean, the news editor, has made a list of the stories that we're going to have on the front page. And knowing that, and knowing what our illustration is, which is the photo that got picked at the conference, I'll start sketching out how we're going to place the stories on the page. This is a sort of a 50% reduction of the actual page, so you can work out the lengths of stories quite easily and the depths of headings quite easily, so you can find out that you're going to have 38 centimetres for your lead story or 45 centimetres. Unlike a lot of the other pages, page 1 is a very much a formulated page where you tell the reporter that you're only going to get 35 centimetres. So whereas on page 5 they might have the chance to write 45 and still get it all in, you know, where you have to, because each centimetre on the front page is so important, they have to write to length all the time. The main thing about it is that you have 2 types of sales. You have the sales where it's home delivery and you've got that, that's a captured market, you're going to get that every day. But the front page is the page that sells the paper on the newsstand. So if you're hoping to pick up, say, 15 or 20% of your sales from the newsstand, which is quite a large percentage. You have to make the front page look as attractive as possible, and you have to also consider that it's going to be folded in half, so you really work very hard on the top half of the page and where you're placing your illustrations for those aspects. This area up here is where the age masthead goes, and also the blur. I always just rule it off at the 6.5 centimetre mark. This is our illustration of the guy looking up at the building. When it comes in the paper, the little box of the table will be in there. We're having an overline here in 24 point, which is just a small kicker line to explain the heading in more detail. Our main heading will be 4 decks of 84 point, and this will be the lead story down into here.
At this point, it is worth pausing to make sure that we understand the language of newspaper layout, with words like masthead, blurb, byline, dateline, caption, headline, banner headline, spill, and pointer. The news area now starts to look a lot more active as reporters finish writing up their stories. These are all channelled into the Age's central computer. This has been a technology change that most journalists have now come to terms with.
It's fairly ironic that when these things were first introduced, I was terrified, and in fact, I think on a similar film as this, I expressed my horror, considering myself a technologically illiterate. But, 4 or 5 years down the track, I can't write without it. I can't write with a typewriter anymore. If I pick up a typewriter, I feel I'm sort of, chiseling into stone. The difference is so great. I can type on this much faster than I could on a typewriter. I can correct, and it suits my style of writing. It allows me to write much more fluently. I think rather fast, so I can just write as I think and correct as I go along, and it's terrific for me.
After 7, the production of the newspaper is overseen by the night editor and the news editor.
The night editor's job really is to oversee the production of the paper from the editorial point of view, to make sure that the editorial section is produced on time, the paper is put together well, balanced, that we're not going to have any problems of legal problems or fact problems, to take account of any late stories that come in after the evening conference, and generally responsible for the operation of the editorial floor after the editor himself has left for the day.
The news editor's job is involved in really pulling together a collection or a list of the main stories of the day, and carrying this through the course of the evening, making sure that we're covering the main aspects of those stories, that they are appropriately paced in the paper according to their importance, and that, again, in each particular story we've covered the most important aspects of that story and got them in more or less in the right order in the story, and more or less, hopefully, in the right order in the paper. The main story is now out, and I'm going to be having a look at it quite shortly to see that it covers the main aspects of the news story today. The editor's indicated that he wants a couple of paragraphs brought higher up in the story, and so I'll be doing some work on that, and once I've finished doing that, I'll indicate this to Paul Watson, one of our senior sub-editors, and he'll take that over and sub it up for page 1.
And what I've got here is the lead to the paper tonight, which is the report of the national wage case, which was handed down today. And I'm subbing it, which means I'm going through it from start to the end, looking for errors of fact, spelling mistakes, style errors, that is, things that don't agree with the way we do things at the Age in particular, and problems with ambiguity. I'm trying to make the story as correct and as readable as I can without changing it too much from what the reporter has written. In this case, I'm having to... The story starts obviously on page 1 and it then turns inside, what we call spills, onto page 4, and when I have gone through it, I'm going to have to adjust the length of the story to fit into the space.
And will this be an easy one to change size-wise?
I hope so.
By 11 o'clock, most of the pages have already been made up and prepared as printing plates. But because of page 1's importance and the possibility of featuring any late-breaking major news, this page is last. The words from the computer system, checked by editors, sub-editors and copy checkers, have been typeset or printed into the right size blocks, and now are arranged onto layout boards together with photographs and advertisements. Photocopies are made so that the pages can be rechecked for errors. While the artwork is first made into a high contrast negative. And then into a series of metal printing plates. That checking and rechecking the newspaper contents is for a very good reason.
Well, at the moment we've just mounted the last page, which is page 1, but because we've got a libel in the paper, we've now got to wait for a follow-on page 12. So the press is plated up, ready to run, all bar page 12.
Can you explain what that means, a libel on page 12?
Well, it means that they've made a blue upstairs editorial, which could cost the Age thousands of dollars if it was in the street. So we cut the libel out of the paper and we just put a follow-on page on. We changed the page.
11:30 Tuesday night, and finally we have a product. The first of 3 editions of Wednesday's Age, ready to distribute to 230,000 readers.
The amazing thing about a newspaper is that it's a brand new product every day. There's nothing as stale as yesterday's newspaper. Each day is a brand new operation, all targeted towards the evening deadline. And the speed with which all these words are processed and edited is astonishing. It's very exciting. But then again, it can be very deflating when you put all that work into one day's product. You know that the next day, after about lunchtime, that product is absolutely stale and useless, and you have to concentrate on the next day.
Well, maybe to some people it's stale and useless, but to students and researchers, yesterday's paper continues to be a cheap but invaluable databank of current and past events.